Hi, I'm Jason Paulus from the Iowa City Public Library, and thank you for joining us for another session here with Burr Oak Land Trust. Today we're at the Turkey Creek property in Johnson County. And this is Lydia. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, my name is Lydia. Yes, today we're at Turkey Creek Nature Preserve. This is one of Burr Oak Land Trust's biggest properties at 107 acres. There's 2 restored prairies here and a woodland habitat.
Today we're going to take a hike around the property and identify some early spring ephemerals. We're here in the second week of April, so if you're out on a hike yet in April, take a look for some of these plants we're seeing here today.
So here we have a pretty common spring ephemeral, root anemone. They're very dainty, delicate little. They can be white to pink. They're easily identified by having a red stem, and also 2 or 3 petals will grow from one main stalk or stem. And these will look pretty similar to spring beauties, but you can tell them apart by the leaf shape and the fact that they're growing in 2 or 3 clusters at the top, whereas spring beauty will usually have one stem and then one petal at the end of it. So this is all of the spring ephemerals are really important for early rising pollinators, such as bumblebees, miner bees, beetles, flies, and ants too. We also have here, this is really common in woodland areas, Virginia waterleaf. So this one is pretty easy to tell as well because the leaf looks like it has water stains on it. Very easily identifiable by that. In this time, very early spring still, these are going to grow very low to the ground. They're going to pretty much cover most of the forest floor in most areas. But later in May or June, these are going to grow about this big, and they're going to have clusters of white tubular flowers at the end of them. They actually turn out to be very pretty, even though they don't look like much right now. So that's Virginia waterleaf. So we've been seeing all kinds of spring ephemerals here, and you're probably wondering what is the importance of these besides they're just there to look pretty. So spring ephemerals are an extremely important and necessary food source for very early emerging pollinators such as queen bumblebees. Now, queen bumblebees that are hibernating through the winter are going to be coming out very early April, sometimes even late March, and they're going to need food and enough food to start their colony in the spring. And where they get that food, the nectar, the pollen, is through these spring ephemerals that are coming up really early. And that's going to be really important for other miner bees as well, beetles, ants. They're all kind of relying on these spring ephemerals to give them the necessary food that they need coming into summer. Now, these delicate and very dainty flowers are coming up this early because they're not going to get enough sunlight once the canopy starts to really thicken up. So they're coming out early because they're going to get enough sunlight, and they have 3 goals in mind, which is to successfully pollinate and reproduce and then store enough carbs so they can come back for the next year. So they're coming out and utilizing the sunlight before everything else takes over the forest floor. All right, so I've walked across to the other side here because I spotted a trout lily, 2 actually right next to each other. These are really beautiful flowers. They're called trout lilies because their leaves, their mottled leaves, resemble a trout. They're really pretty leaves. Trout lilies are usually going to be either yellow or white like this. Right now, since it's a little bit cloudy, it's cloudy and cold, so their petals are protecting the stamens underneath there, but usually you'll see those petals peel back in a really beautiful fashion, and you'll be able to see the pollen on the inside. So with trout lilies, these are really important in an ecosystem because they actually have a specialist miner bee. Specialist miner bees are going to be bees that come out usually when the trout lily is coming up. So they've timed their emergence from hibernation as this trout lily is coming up because the trout lily is depending on that miner bee for pollination. And a miner bee is looking for the pollen in the trout lily. So usually with trout lilies, if there is one leaf, it usually means it's a younger trout lily. If there's two, it means it's a older trout lily, has come back year after year. And with both of these, we see that there are two leaves, so that means it's probably coming back year 3 or 4, which is awesome to see. So as we were walking, we've come across a lot of spring beauty in these woodlands. We found one that was open here, one of the few. Spring beauty is identified by having this one long elongated leaf here. Like I was saying earlier, you can tell these apart from rue anemone by the leaves mostly. And we have here Carolina spring beauty and Virginia spring beauty. How I like to tell those apart is that Virginia spring beauty is going to be, the lobes of the petals are going to be a little more rounded, and the Virginia spring beauty, the lobes are going to be a little more pointed. It's not always the best way, but I found that works for me. And you'll find these pretty common. As you can see, they're kind of all over the place here. Spring beauties also do have specialist miner bees that help in pollination. They're going to be coming for the pollen and the nectar, and in turn pollinating these as well. A little bit further back is a hillside that is usually covered in Virginia bluebells.
Oh, okay.
And as you're approaching it, it's really awesome because the hillside looks gray, or it looks like it's like almost there's smoke on it because there's so many blue flowers covering it. It's really cool. So here we've come across a cluster of May apples on this hillside. You can tell May apples because they will look like an umbrella. They have these really deeply lobed leaves at the very top. Later in the spring and into summer, they're going to produce a really pretty white flower that's going to be kind of under these leaves here. But once that gets pollinated about June or July, it's going to produce a fruit that's about this big. It's going to be a yellow fruit, and that's really important food source for some browsing animals, and some people even make jam out of mayapple fruit. So right here we have a couple patches of bluebells here, Virginia bluebells. So named because of their flower shape that resemble bells. They have really smooth leaves, so even before the flowers are popping out and they're starting to grow, you can see their leaves starting to come out. And when they're just starting to pop out, they're gonna look pink, but as they start to grow, they start to develop into blue petals. And so you get this really nice array of pink and blue on these flowers, which definitely make them a favorite for gardens and also for photography and just for looking at because they're so beautiful. These are also a favorite for bumblebees because bumblebees have really long proboscises. They're going to be able to reach down into that tube flower and get the nectar from it. Not many other bees are able to do that. Another thing that you'll see with Virginia bluebells when they're just starting to emerge is they'll have this dark purple coloration on the leaves. As they're starting to grow, that's going to turn into a bright green. But that's another way that you can tell Virginia bluebells is by their dark purple leaves up top here. So Jason just pointed out that here we have the starting of phlox. That's a really common woodland species as well. It grows up to be pretty big actually, probably usually about this tall, but right now it's still pretty small. They do tend to grow to their full mature height probably by the end of May, and they have really pretty purple flowers at the end of them. Can be clusters of pink, purple, light blue, all sorts of colors. But you can see that the stems and the leaves are hairy. This is what is distinguishable with phlox. Pretty hairy stems and leaves. All right, here we have one of my favorite spring ephemerals, Dutchman's breeches. This is so named because the long, slender pink stem resembles a clothesline, and then the delicate white flowers they look like pants hanging from a clothesline. So kind of a funny name. But these are really awesome because really only the bumblebees are able to get to the very tip of these petals and reach in there with their long proboscis and get the nectar out of there. And at the bottom of Dutchman's breeches is the leaves, which look like very delicate small ferns almost. They're very deeply lobed, grow in clusters here. All right, up on this ridge here, we're coming across a lot of bloodroot. Bloodroot are really delicate flowers. They have the white petals up top here. Right now they're closed since it's not very sunny, but they open up into a really fantastic flower. These flowers do not offer any nectar when they come up, but they do offer a lot of pollen. And so ants will actually help to pollinate this plant. After the seeds drop from this bloodroot, the ants are going to carry the seed back to their home and actually eat the outer coating of the seed that is really nutrient rich. And they're just going to kind of disperse the seed because they don't care for it. They just want the nutrient-rich coating of it. So that's how ants are helping to spread the bloodroot here. And initially it was named bloodroot because the stem, when you open that stem up, it's going to ooze a red liquid out of it. That red liquid, I would not recommend ingesting it. It can be poisonous. You'll see often the bloodroot leaf come out before the actual petal, and it looks a lot like a garlic mustard leaf, but it's going to be more deeply lobed. It's going to be softer and bigger than a garlic mustard leaf. So really commonly seen on woodland forest floors, along gardens, along sidewalks, pretty much everywhere is the common violet. So these come up pretty early too and are a sure sign that spring is coming. With violets, something really interesting about these is that they will actually fling their seed pods 2 to 3 feet away from the stalk so that they can reproduce basically and spread their seeds as far as they can. These are also one of the flowers that are also helped by ants that are taking the seeds and eating the outer nutrient-rich coating of these violets. So usually we see purple, deep purple violets, we see blue, and also sometimes even yellow, which is pretty rare. This is awesome. So these trout lilies are small, but they have their petals peeled back in their usual fashion here so that the yellow stamens aren't exposed. So I hope you guys enjoyed our spring ephemeral walk and learning about all the different spring ephemerals at Turkey Creek. We work really hard here at Borough Land Trust to protect this habitat and protect these woodlands from development and improve the quality of habitat, so we still have these spring ephemerals around for many generations to come. We have a guide, a spring ephemeral guide that will be posted by the library, so you can print it off and follow along on your hike at Turkey Creek. There's going to be some flowers on there that we did not cover today because they're not out, but if you come back in a couple weeks, you'll see a lot more stuff blooming.